Today I'm reacting to your wrestling hot takes. You can submit your hot takes every Thursday on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. The link will be down in the description below. I usually make these videos every Sunday, but you're getting it a day early because Sunday is going to be nothing but payback content. And hey, as always, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. We upload daily wrestling content, so if you're a wrestling fan, I'm confident that you're going to like this channel, so go ahead and subscribe. Oh, hey, look, this one comes from Chris Van Vliet. The Miz needs to be a WWE champion again before he retires. I've been on this Miz is amazing bandwagon for the last several years. I do believe that he absolutely deserves to be at the top of the mountain once again. Whether it's WWE champion or world heavyweight champion, I'm kind of okay with either, but the fact that now we have multiple titles on multiple shows definitely opens up the opportunity for somebody like The Miz to regain that spot, and he would be absolutely fantastic. He's already shown to be a great stepping stone for younger talent, so we can have somebody that has never won a world championship try and go after The Miz's world title, and The Miz can just be such a great evil, snively, coward champion. We've seen it before, but now we need to see it with this veteran, grizzly version of The Miz, who is the best mic worker in the entire company. I think it would be a great final run for him. Santi is the best wrestling content creator. I mean, if you're gonna say so, then yeah, you're right. They have dragged out the bloodline story for too long. It got super good, but I've had way more than enough of it. I'm ready for it to just end. Look, I get it. We are in uncharted territory. We haven't had a story last this long since ever. Like literally, I don't think that a storyline, an actual storyline, like I know we've had title reigns that have been longer than Roman Reigns's, but an actual cohesive narrative from beginning to end, I don't think that we've had that ever in the world of professional wrestling. And there is still so much more to tell, but I get the fatigue and the frustration, especially since the bloodline has been so good and has just been increasing and increasing and increasing with every premium live event, with every weekly show. It's gotten better and better, but for the first time we went from here down to here, but I still think that it can climb back up and be even better than the peaks that it was a couple of months ago. There's still a lot more to tell. We'll just have to wait and see. SmackDown and Raw should both be 2.5 hours. 3 is too much, but sometimes 2 doesn't feel like enough. I'm of the mind that 2 is enough. I just don't think that the WWE actually has enough programming for 2 hours, let alone for 3 hours. Raw is one of the worst culprits of this. What they'll do is about like half of the show, and I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but if I am exaggerating, it's not that much, but like half of the actual on-air television show is recaps. It'll be recaps of what happened in the previous premium live event, recaps of what happened on Raw, recaps of what happened on SmackDown, recaps of what happened on NXT, and there's actually very little wrestling. Like the amount of recaps is getting actually kind of silly. It's gotten so bad to the point that they'll come back from commercial break, do a recap, and then go back to commercial break. Like 3 hours clearly is just far too long for the WWE. And to me, this is one of the reasons why I don't like to go to the weekly live shows in person like Raw and SmackDown, because you're kind of just sitting there for a huge portion of the time watching recaps of things that have already happened, but you're like there in person, so you're just watching the big screen just like everyone is at home, except everyone at home has the comfort of being able to not share a bathroom with 2,500 people. SmackDown is less of a bad culprit when it comes to this stuff, but the show's still padded out with plenty of recaps of useless things. Do you know what the worst type of recap is? Sometimes they'll spend 5 minutes doing a recap of something that happened in the before the last commercial break. So it'll like do the thing, go to commercial break, come back, do the recap of the thing that happened before the commercial break, and then go to commercial break. Like, it's getting nuts. It's getting a little bit silly. I'm gonna say it. CM Punk is the Kanye West of wrestling, where they're both very talented, but the stuff they say or do behind the scenes makes it harder to defend them and sometimes even enjoy what they're gonna do next. This is actually a wonderful comparison because I think that it's true. Punk is one of my favorites of all time, and I am, to a fault, a defender of CM Punk. I will be the first at the battle lines to tell you that CM Punk did nothing wrong. But the more that comes out, the more stories that happen, the fact that, you know, last year there was all that drama and then he leaves AEW, and then there's no drama, and then he comes back to AEW, and now there's drama again, makes me wonder and makes me ask the question of maybe the problem is CM Punk. He tries to make it seem like it's everyone else's fault, like everyone else is out to get him, like people are just trying to step on Punk, but it seems like it only happens to CM Punk. Like, is CM Punk just this hated of a wrestling figure in the back room, or maybe he is the problem? Like, I'm starting to now wonder that. As a Punk apologist, I have to agree with this statement. Wesley has the most potential in NXT and should be pushed to singles immediately in his call-up. I am concerned for Wesley whenever he does get called up. I don't know if he has the most potential in NXT, like if we're looking at the grander picture of where they can actually end up, because I think somebody like Braun Breaker is the one with the most potential to be the face of the main roster at some point. As much as WWE has changed away from it just being giant burly dudes, it's not common to have somebody as small as Wesley be the face of the WWE. So I am concerned for Wesley when he gets called up to the main roster, where I just hope he doesn't end up being a sideshow on main event, because the man is just wildly talented. So yeah, I would say that Braun Breaker is the one that has the highest ceiling in terms of what he can accomplish, but in terms of untapped potential, I think that goes to Ilya Dragunov. Becky Lynch's the man gimmick has run its course, and now she needs a new one. Well, they gave her a new one and everyone hated it and wanted it to go back to the man. She was big time Bex for a while, where she kind of like dressed up like as a 80s rock star. I kind of dug big time Bex, but hey, everybody, hey, we don't want to boo Becky Lynch. We want her to be a good guy. We want her to be the man. She goes back to the man, and now we have people saying that they don't want to see the man anymore. What do you want? A good story is better than a 5-star match. Way more invested if the character is fully developed and I'm attached to it. Like, I enjoy Omega Ospreay matches, but I don't care who wins, and that's a problem. There's sometimes no buildup, which kills the matches for me. I think that's fair. I think the correct answer is like, what's most important? Like, the answer is like, why not both? Because a really great storyline can definitely be derailed by a terrible match in ring. Like, that's just the fact of the matter. Just like a great match can be kind of derailed and belittled if there's no story, kind of like what you're saying here. So I think the sword cuts both ways. What do I prefer? I also do prefer a much better story as opposed to a much better match, because then I can be a little bit more forgiving if the match isn't an absolute 5-star classic. Because if the story is bad, the only thing that can save it is a really good 5-star classic. I think a good example of something that isn't necessarily a 5-star classic, but the story got the fans so excited and clamored for it that the crowd carried the match, is Hulk Hogan versus The Rock. Because the match in silence, like if you take out the fans, is a 0 out of 5. But because people were so invested in the storyline, so invested in the moment, the fans made that match into what I think is a 5-star WWE moment. I agree with your sentiment, but I think there is, two sides to the story here. The Bella Twins are better wrestlers than the entire female roster today, in parentheses, fact. I don't actually think that you know what a fact is. I'm pretty sure that this is about as an opinion as it gets. It is also a completely wrong opinion, because absolutely they are not better wrestlers than the entire female roster today. I am somebody that gives the Bella Twins their flowers. They are incredibly vital and important in the development of women's wrestling. They are two individuals that were the face of the Divas division, right? Like the objectification of women, but with the evolution of women's wrestling, like they came out of that Divas cesspool and became legitimate wrestlers later on in their career. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for the Bella Twins. I think they are super important, but the best wrestlers and better than any of the women in the main roster today, like that's ludicrous. There are so, like we have, like, come on, like they can't lace the boots of somebody like an Asuka, a Shayna Baszler, a Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, as much as everyone hates her. But yeah, like the women's wrestling in terms of skill in the ring, like is up here compared to like down here where it was about, I don't know, 11, 12 years ago. It would be awesome for the current WWE to create a mixed tag team titles. That way, mixed factions like Alpha Academy, Judgment Day, or the LWO would have better chances chances to get some or more gold. Okay, you mentioned literally like the only 3 examples that this would work for. So now we have a title that really only works cohesively, narratively for 3 teams in the entire roster. Because now we're going to need to make makeshift teams that don't make too much sense. There can be some that make some sense, like a Maurice and The Miz, but for the most part, you'd just be throwing people together for the sake of creating a division. And you know where we've seen that before? The women's division, where sometimes they just like lump in random people and say, hey, you're a tag team now, deal with it. All right. So we've already seen that this doesn't work with the women's titles. So why add another set of titles that are going to ultimately mean nothing? The Rock versus Cena's quote once in a lifetime match at WrestleMania 28 was the best match in the history of WrestleMania. Look, I appreciate this, but it is wildly wrong, because I do believe it is the biggest match in WrestleMania history, especially now with the power of hindsight, knowing not just how big The Rock would become even more giant in the lexicon of popular culture, but then John Cena is as big as The Rock was back then. So now we had a match of 2 of the greatest of all time to do it in the WWE and 2 of the biggest names on the planet. All right. Obviously, the power of hindsight gives us that. It is undeniably the biggest WrestleMania match. And in terms of star power, I don't think it could ever be topped, period. But in terms of the best match, no, there's so many better matches at WrestleMania. But I love the energy and the electricity of this match. And it is one of my favorite matches at WrestleMania. But it is because of the electricity more so than just the in-ring work. The world of wrestling would not be the same without Hulk Hogan. He is one of the true GOATs. I mean, sure, yeah, like Hulk Hogan is the one who created the concept of a superstar, like being a larger than life character, as opposed to just being 2 sweaty dudes grappling one another in front of an audience, you know, in the 70s and 60s. Like, he really created this concept of the superhero, the larger than life character, somebody that you want to get behind. So yeah, like, of course, wrestling would be entirely different, maybe even non-existent, if it wasn't for somebody like Hulk Hogan. If Hulk Hogan were around today, then you know, wrestling would be better without him, because you know, we wouldn't be getting so many people getting opportunities to climb to the top, because it got to the point where Hulk Hogan was just hogging that spot. Indus should be pushed to be a main card tag team. They were shown for like a month on TV and then disappeared. Sure, I agree. The tag team division definitely needs a lot more identifiable, like true tag teams. That being said, you know, if we were to add Indus, we would be losing our vital recaps. What would we do without all of the recaps on Monday Night Raw? How would I know what happened 5 minutes ago? So I disagree. We need more recaps so Indus can go kick rocks. Rhea Ripley should break Bruno Sammartino's world title record with her current reign. No, but I pick this because I like where your narrative is, and it's a demonstration of how Roman Reigns has changed the narrative of like what makes a great champion, because before we used to be worried about how many times they won that world championship, and now we have people clamoring for really long, drawn out championship reigns. So yeah, like it's just a great example of how the narrative has changed because of this Roman Reigns title reign. But yeah, no, absolutely no, definitely not. Braun Strowman should have won the Universal title at some point in 2018. His aura took a massive hit after the failed heel turn. Absolutely, like Braun Strowman was so over with the fans. Everybody wanted him to have that title. Everybody wanted to have him take that title off of Brock Lesnar. Like it was, I don't understand how they didn't pull the trigger on him. Everyone was already loathing and resenting Brock Lesnar. So, and you had the one believable guy in terms of like size, strength, and power to dethrone Brock Lesnar, who is there weekly. It just sort of made sense to finally take the strap off of Brock Lesnar, who everyone loathed and hated, and put it on the popular guy who has a realistic, you know, physical presence to beat somebody like Brock Lesnar. Everyone likes him and they're there every week. It was so logical. And then for some reason they have him fail with his cash in, they have him fail with his title shots, and then they turn him heel, and then he teams up with, what was it, Ziggler or McIntyre? It was dumb. AEW has ruined the excitement of bleeding, swearing, using the middle finger, and thumbtacks in wrestling, since they basically do these things on a weekly basis. I agree. And you know, I'm not some like, oh my God, clutching my pearls, how could they do all of this bleeding? I like blood in wrestling, and I like it when it makes sense, and I like the brutality of stuff like thumbtacks. But when AEW is doing things like 3 consecutive consecutive Canadian destroyers and no one is selling them, it does make the Canadian destroyer go from what was at one time one of the coolest, gnarliest, deadliest looking finishers into a complete joke. So I get the sentiment here, because if you see bleeding every week, swearing all the time, middle fingers, you start to become desensitized to it. So, you know what? Yeah, I kind of agree with this. Edge would be in heavy conversation for being the GOAT if he didn't retire early. Yes, he lost 9 years of his career and he was already in the conversation for GOAT before he retired. Who knows what he could have accomplished in those 9 years? Because John Cena, in that time that Edge was gone, like really cemented his legacy by doing so many awesome things, including things like the US Open Challenge, which really endeared the fans to John Cena. And like that's when Cena, in those latter years, that's when he built his legacy as one of the GOATs. And Edge didn't have that. So yeah, you're right. Becky Lynch versus Trish Stratus should have happened at SummerSlam. The fact that their match in Saudi Arabia was actually all right, they would have been more entertaining than Ronda versus Shayna. Well, yeah, I mean, in retrospect, yeah, Ronda versus Shayna was terrible, but Ronda versus Shayna was actually very hyped for in the community. Let's not just be Captain Hindsight over here. But yeah, like if we're using the powers of hindsight, sure. I mean, my shoe versus my cell phone would have been a more entertaining bout than Ronda versus Shayna. John Cena should win the Intercontinental Championship. Yes, and I wouldn't hate it if he was the one to dethrone Gunther, because it would actually elevate Gunther to demonstrate the world that the only person that could actually realistically beat him is somebody that is in the conversation for greatest of all time. What I don't want to see if Cena beats him for the Intercontinental Championship is a continued feud a la Rusev where Cena just continues to win. They need to do one of two things. If they have a rematch, Gunther needs to beat Cena, or we just separate Gunther from Cena altogether and he needs to go for a world title. That's how we elevate Gunther in this scenario. Santino Marella should have been world champ at some point. I mean, it would have been interesting. I mean, he was really close during that Elimination Chamber match where he almost made Daniel Bryan tap out, and the crowd, you know, we were hypnotized. We wanted to see it at that time, but I don't know if this would have been good. Ryback is underrated and underappreciated. Look, I think a lot of the hate towards Ryback came from that CM Punk interview, and now that things are like coming to light and people are starting to realize that maybe CM Punk isn't the greatest person to work with, it's making me realize that maybe Ryback got a lot of hate when maybe it wasn't necessarily deserved. I don't know, but I've never been on that hate Ryback bandwagon. Woo, I got banned by Ryback. I don't want to get banned by Ryback. I like Ryback. Long title reigns are stale. Titles changing hands more frequently keep things exciting. Well, I would say that we need the in-between, because I would argue that titles changing hands really frequently belittles the title. Look at the TNT title over in AEW that changed like literally like 5 times in a month, and it just became a joke. Logan Paul isn't a wrestler. His name as a TikTok and YouTube star is what makes people want to watch him and like him as a wrestler. I don't think he's a TikTok star in any way, shape, or form, but okay, let's just say the word. His work as an influencer, his name as an influencer is what makes people want to watch him. That's one of your arguments. Well, duh. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Of course, that is the reason why people want to watch him. That's the reason why the WWE like paid him to appear in the WWE in the first place, because he came with an existing audience. But then you also say that that's what makes him like us, as like makes us like him as a wrestler. It's like the complete opposite. Like his work as a social media influencer is what makes a lot of fans actually hate him and resent him and not want to see him succeed. Had he not done all of this stuff and has all of that baggage as a content creator, we'd probably just be rooting for Logan Paul as an awesome up and coming talent. So Brock Lesnar is arguably top 5 of all time. No, but he would have been undeniably and maybe even like the GOAT of professional wrestling had he not left for all of those years for the UFC, and had his final run not been just nothing but a part-time run. Had he been more full-time throughout his career, I think he'd definitely be a top 5, but he not only that, he could be the greatest of all time. Keith Lee should have been a main eventer. Yes, and then he went over to AEW where we all thought he would be a main eventer and then didn't get utilized as a main eventer. So at that point, I have to now ask myself, was WWE, did they fumble with Keith Lee and then also AEW fumbled with Keith Lee? Like, is it realistic to think that both companies fumbled Keith Lee? Or maybe they see stuff that we don't see, and maybe Keith Lee isn't a main eventer. I'm just saying it's tough to argue against two companies basically making the same decision. But I love Keith Lee. Like, I absolutely adore him. I think he is such a great presence. That run in NXT was wonderful. His Survivor Series gauntlet against Roman Reigns was awesome. But yeah, I mean, two of the biggest companies on the planet didn't use him as a main eventer, so maybe he isn't one. The COVID era of WWE wasn't as bad as everyone thought it was. The COVID era allowed WWE to be more creative with its material and wrestlers on levels that we've never seen before, saving the creativity that WWE was starting to lack at the time. The COVID era was definitely a bad thing. Like, a lot of people lost their jobs, wrestlers lost their jobs, production, writers, corporate staff at WWE lost their jobs. From that perspective, the COVID era of WWE was actually super dark. I mean, I remember like every other couple months we'd hear about like a giant slew of layoffs. So there is obviously like a very dark side to the pandemic era of the WWE. That being said, you're not wrong. Like, it did force the WWE to be more creative, and it also allowed wrestlers to explore narrative and character work while in the ring, because they would actually be heard by the cameras as opposed to being drowned out by an audience. Roman Reigns is a great example where he started the concept of like trash talking during the match, which really elevated his character. We have things like the Firefly Funhouse match, which is one of the greatest pieces of creativity that the WWE has had. So there are brilliance of creativity that came about from the COVID era, but overall it's a stain on the WWE. Seth's Messiah gimmick was heavily underrated. Shit, yeah, dude, I like the Messiah gimmick. It was great. All right, that's it. If you want to submit your hot takes for next week, make sure you're following me on Twitter. The link is down in the description below. That's it. I'm done. Enjoy Payback. Get out of here.